It's a short engagement. Our scene setter, Dr. Ndlozi, I was very glad when he said, I'm not here today to lecture. I've been looking for a job at the University of Dar es Salaam as a lecturer. I hope they give me a job. The idea was that we should meet here to engage one another on this topic that's on our board here about re-energizing, reigniting the African Renaissance. Not for either President Kikwete or myself to lecture. I think that was said by my comrade there, Sabato, was correct. It was very, very correct indeed that we were not here to answer questions. We're here to engage one another in answering those questions. I'm very, very glad indeed that when he said, even the youth have got answers. So it was not for the youth to pose questions, but to say, this is where we are today, this is where we need to be tomorrow. It's the kind of engagement that we were supposed to have. So you'll excuse me if I don't answer the questions as they've been put. The word Renaissance, we know all of us what it means. It means a rebirth. So when we talk about an African Renaissance, we're talking about an Africa reborn. Dr. Ndlozi, I don't know whether we all know what that means. What is this Africa that we imagine? I think our colleague who talked about socio-economic development did say there are certain things that have gone wrong which should not happen, then we would know that we're being reborn. One of the great strengths, my view, one of the great strengths of the OAU and the AU, these continental organizations, is that they actually attended to this matter. An Africa reborn, what should it look like? As a consequence of which, as a continent, we are very, very rich in terms of policy. I don't know of any major issue facing us as Africans on which there is no continental policy. The politics of our continent, issues about democracy, accountability, good governance, all of that. There are policies. When we're talking about women's empowerment, gender equality, and all of that, there are policies. Issues of youth development, youth empowerment, and so on, culture, education, science and technology, peace and security, all of these things. If I asked, if we had time, I asked the universities here, the students of the University of Dar es Salaam, and say, do they know what AU, not AU, African Continental Policy on Youth Development is? Can you please raise your hands? None. Yet there is. And I think we would find that with regard to many of these policies, which I say exist, and when Dar es Salaam University appoints me lecturer, I will give you the documents. This is part of our challenge. The policy positions exist on the continent, approved by our political leaders, many of them ratified by our parliaments. So there's a policy framework which exists for the Renaissance of Africa. One of our comrades just said that the answer is socialism. It's not, that one I know is not in the AU policies. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I know it's not in the policies. There is no shortage of a general, overall, comprehensive policy framework to define the kind of new Africa we want, the Africa reborn. There's a problem. The problem is that the Africans don't know of that. How do we solve it? I don't have an answer to that question. But it's a critical matter that we need to solve. If we say the future of our continent, as Dr. Ndlozi was saying, this issue of self-reliance, the future of our continent is defined by ourselves. He said it's not going to be defined by the Chinese or the Indians or the Americans or the Russians, but ourselves, correct. But I'm saying here is African institutions which say, with regard to that question, this is what our future should be politically, economically, peace and security, this and that and the other. And yet as Africans, we don't know that. That's a serious problem. President Kikwete, other people his age, my age, a bit younger perhaps, will also know that at a certain point in our history on the continent, we had a number of organizations focused on this task of the transformation of our continent. Some of our presenters have put this matter about agency. What's our role? These visions that we have about our continent, how do you bring them about? Earlier, there used to be on the continent a Pan-African youth movement made up of youth organizations who would meet and discuss and say, what do we do about this continent of ours? Young people. Where is it now? It's disappeared. There was an African Students' Union, and the students' unions of various countries all across the continent would meet and ask this question and answer it, what do we about our continent, including its education and all of that. That disappeared. There was an organization called the All African Trade Union Unity, which brought together all of the African trade unions, organized political organization formation of the organized workers on the continent about the future of our continent. Disappeared. And there was PAO, Pan-African Women's Organization. The PAO still exists. I saw its president not long ago. She participated in the inauguration of the president of Namibia, was here earlier today. We didn't have time to discuss PAO. It exists, but you don't feel its weight. The voice of the African women, that's a body which brought together all of these African women's organizations who would say, as the women of Africa, this is where we want Africa to go. I'm saying it exists, but I don't feel its weight. It's an issue of agency. Our colleagues ask about how do you solve a question about youth employment, youth empowerment, and all of that. I'm saying that the youth need to be party to the answering of that question. But they don't have the organizations on the continent which give them the necessary power as a youth to act together, to say, we as the youth of Africa, this is what we're saying, whether it's employment or whatever. One of the organs of the African Union is an ECOSOC, which brings the cultural, social, and organizations. And that is the task of it. Well, composition of it is to bring in the ordinary African people into that process, represented by various organizations, economic, cultural, political, whatever. would serve side by side with the governmental institutions of the African Union. But if I ask any one of you here to say, has it ever come to Tanzania that ECOSOC? We are an official body of the African Union. We are not government, we are not ministers. But we are trade unionists, we are youth organizers, we are women organizers, and so on. But we are an official structure. I'm sure it's never come here. I don't know if other African countries ever come to. Because essentially it exists on paper. What's the problem?